Imagine putting your children to bed one night, kissing their foreheads, pulling up their blankets, 8 of them. And someone they loved, someone they trusted, decided that would be the last time they ever opened their eyes. There's a question that investigators asked for weeks after this happened. Not how, not when, but why. Why would a man, a father, look into the faces of his own children and make that choice? And when the answer finally came out, it didn't make people angry. It made them sick. Because the reason Shamar Elkins did what he did that night had been building for years. Right in front of everyone who knew him. And nobody, not one person, saw it coming. Stay with me. Because this story does not go where you think it's going. The man nobody questioned. From the outside, Shamar Elkins looked like a lot of men you've probably met. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Shamar Elkins actually was. Not the version he presented to the world. The real one. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He had a family. He had children. He had people who depended on him. And that's exactly what made this so hard to understand later. Because the monsters that do the most damage in this world, they rarely look like monsters. They look like neighbors. They look like fathers. They look like Shamar Elkins. People who knew him described him in ways that now feel almost cruel in hindsight. Words like quiet. Words like private. Some said he seemed stressed, but who isn't? The truth is, Shamar Elkins had constructed a version of himself that he showed to the world. And beneath that version was something else entirely. He had a wife. He had an ex-wife. And between those 2 women, he had fathered 8 children. 8. And every single one of those children woke up that morning not knowing it would be their last day on earth. That's the part that never leaves you. Behind the quiet, the making of Shamar Elkins. Before we go any further, we need to talk about who Shamar Elkins actually was. Not the image he built. Not the surface. The real man. Because when you lay out the pieces of his life, side by side, in order, a portrait starts to emerge. And it is one of the most haunting portraits you will ever look at. Not because he was a monster born from nothing, but because he was a man built, piece by piece, for exactly what he would eventually do. Shamar Elkins was born to a mother named Mahalia, who was herself just a teenager when she had him. And Mahalia, battling a crack cocaine addiction that had consumed her life, made a decision that no mother wants to make. She gave her son away. Not to family. Not to a grandparent or an aunt. To a family friend. A woman named Betty Walker. And Betty Walker took that child in. She raised him. Let that sit for a second. Because right there, right at the very start of his life, Shamar Elkins learned something that a child should never have to learn. That the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally can leave. That love is not permanent. That love is something that can be taken away. That you can be taken away. Given away. Set aside. And whether he ever fully understood why his mother made that choice, that wound never fully closed. Somewhere in the mid-2010s, Shamar reconnected with the mother who had given him away. Mahalia. His biological mother. And this is the part that makes you wonder what those conversations were like. What do you say to the woman who gave you away because of her addiction? Do you forgive her? Do you resent her? Do you love her and hate her at the same time? Whatever happened between them in those years of reconnection, it clearly wasn't enough to fill what had been broken at the very beginning. In 2013, Shamar Elkins enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard. He trained as a signal systems and fire support specialist. He wore the uniform. He did what was asked of him. But he was never deployed. He served 7 years. And in 2020, he left the Guard as a private. After all that, he was still just a man trying to figure out who he was. Working a job at UPS. Driving those routes. Delivering packages. Coming home. From the outside ordinary. From the inside, we don't fully know. But here's where the story starts to change. Here's where the warning signs stopped being invisible. Because in 2023, something happened that should have stopped everything right then and there. His soon-to-be wife, Shaneiqua Pugh, apparently told him she was thinking about leaving. Said she might take her children with her. And Betty Walker, the woman who raised him, heard what Shamar said back. He didn't try to talk her out of it. He didn't plead. He didn't say, "Let's work on this." He said, "And I want you to hear this clearly. If you try to leave, I'll kill you, my kids, and myself." 2023. More than a year before the night everything ended. He said those words out loud. To a woman he claimed to love. And the relationship continued. And nobody stopped it. Now, I need you to understand something. That statement is not a throwaway line. That is not something a man says in the heat of an argument and doesn't mean. That is a man telling you exactly who he is. Exactly what he believes. That if he cannot have control of his family, if he cannot keep them, he would rather destroy them than lose them. He told them who he was. In plain language. In 2023. And then in February 2026, just weeks before that night, Shamar Elkins tried to kill himself. He attempted suicide. Betty Walker knew about it. After the attempt, he went into counseling at a nearby Veterans Affairs hospital. A cousin of his brother-in-law later told reporters that Elkins went in for a mental health evaluation and stayed for a week and a half. A week and a half. And then he was released. Back into the world. Back into the same circumstances that had driven him to the edge. And on April 5th, less than 2 weeks before the attack, Shamar called his biological mother's home. His stepfather picked up. And Shamar told him he was having dark thoughts. Including thoughts of suicide. And then, mid-conversation, he stopped himself. And said something that, in hindsight, sounds less like a goodbye. And more like a warning. He said, "Some people don't come back from their demons." And then he hung up. Those words were spoken 11 days before 8 children went to sleep for the last time. Now let me tell you something else about this man. Because there's a piece of his past that makes this all even harder to sit with. In 2019, Shamar Elkins got into a confrontation. A car pulled up. Someone pointed a gun at him. And Shamar fired back. 5 rounds. Into a car that was moving away from him. Here's the part that makes it worse. He was less than 300 feet from Caddo Magnet High School. Children were outside playing. He fired 5 rounds in the direction of a school while kids were in the yard. He was arrested. Charged with illegal use of weapons and carrying a firearm on school property. He pleaded guilty to the weapons charge in October 2019. The second charge was dismissed. He received 18 months of probation. And he walked. 3 years before that, in 2016, he had been convicted of driving while intoxicated. So we have a man who, by 2026, had a DWI conviction. A weapons charge for firing near a school with children present. A prior suicide attempt. A documented pattern of threatening his family with death. A mental health evaluation that resulted in a week and a half of inpatient care. A phone call 11 days before the attack saying he was drowning in dark thoughts. Every single one of those details was known to someone. And he was still out there. Still free. Still carrying whatever was building inside him. And what was building? His marriage was ending. Shaneiqua was pulling away. They were due in court on April 20th, a separation and custody hearing. And Shamar's own brother told reporters exactly how he felt about it. He said Shamar had been distraught, falling apart, and that Shamar had looked at him and said, "Bro, I don't want to lose my wife. Not, I want to fix things. Not, I'm going to fight for my marriage. Just, I don't want to lose her." From a man who had already told someone he'd kill his family before he let them go. From a man who had already tried to take his own life. From a man who had already said, 11 days earlier, that some people don't come back from their demons. And here is where the story turns from a portrait into a timeline. On the morning of the attack, before sunrise, before the neighborhood stirred, At around 5:55 a.m., Shamar Elkins drove to a home on Harrison Street, where his ex-wife, Christina Snow, lived. He shot her 9 times. 9 times. And somehow, Christina Snow survived. But when the shock allowed her to think, she realized something that had to have been its own kind of horror. 3 of her children were gone. He had taken them with him. Then he drove to the 300 block of West 79th Street, where Shaneiqua lived, where 5 children were sleeping. It is believed that when he entered that home, every single one of those children was asleep. They never heard him coming. They never had a chance to run. Shaneiqua Pugh was shot, but survived. The children did not. 7 of those 8 children were Shamar Elkins' own blood. The 8th, a 10-year-old boy named Markaydon Pugh, was the son of Shamar's brother-in-law. A child who was simply there. Simply present. In the wrong home, at the wrong moment. Their names were Jayla Elkins, 3 years old. Shayla Elkins, 5. Braylon Snow, 5. Kayla Pugh, 6. Khedarrion Snow, 6. Layla Pugh, 7. Markaydon Pugh, 10. Sariahh Snow. All of them asleep when he walked in. And this is where things take a dark turn, not just criminally, but existentially. When you look at that list of names, you realize something. Some of those children shared his name. Jayla Elkins. Shayla Elkins. His name. In their name. A permanent piece of him, literally written into who they were. And he erased them anyway. That is who Shamar Elkins was. Not a mystery. Not an enigma. A man with a documented history of violence, mental deterioration, and explicit threats against his own family. A man who told people, in words they could understand, exactly where he was heading. A man the system touched briefly, and then released back into the world before the storm inside him had passed. And now we carry forward into the rest of this story knowing something we didn't know before. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't random. This was the end of a very long road. And the children who died at the end of it never chose to walk it. 2 women, 1 man, a slow burning tension. To understand what happened, you have to understand the dynamic Shamar had built around himself. He wasn't just navigating one relationship. He was managing 2 separate worlds, and the walls between them were getting thinner. His ex-wife, the mother of some of his children, had history with him. The kind of history that doesn't just disappear when papers are signed. There were tensions. There were disagreements. People who knew both women said they didn't exactly have peace between them either. And Shamar was at the center of all of it. Now here's where it starts to get complicated. Because Shamar wasn't just a man trying to co-parent. He was a man who needed control. Not the loud, obvious kind. Not the kind that leaves bruises that neighbors can see. The quiet kind. The kind where he needed to know where his children were. Who they were with. What was being said about him. The kind where losing that control, even just feeling like he was losing it, made something shift inside him. And in the months before that night, something had started shifting. Slowly at first. Then all at once. The warning signs everyone missed. Here's the thing about warning signs. They only look like warning signs after the fact. Before that night, anyone who had watched Shamar Elkins closely might have noticed changes. Mood swings that came out of nowhere. A short fuse where there used to be patience. Conversations that went sideways fast. There were reportedly disagreements, escalating ones. Words said that couldn't be taken back. And beneath all of that was a slow unraveling that the people around him either didn't recognize or didn't know what to do about. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that there were children in the middle of all of it. 8 children who lived between 2 households. 8 children who probably felt the weight of that tension without being able to name it. Kids are like that. They feel everything adults are trying to hide. And they hide what they feel because they don't want to make things worse. Those 8 kids, they were trapped inside an adult storm they didn't choose and couldn't escape. And the night Shamar Elkins made his decision, they couldn't escape it either. The night everything broke. Let's talk about what happened. Not as a list of facts. Not as a police report. But as a sequence of events that, once you hear them, you cannot unhear. That night, something happened that pushed Shamar Elkins past whatever edge he had been standing on. We may never know the exact moment. Maybe it was a phone call. Maybe it was a message. Maybe it was something said, or not said by the women in his life. But something cracked. And when it cracked, Shamar Elkins didn't run away from it. He didn't leave. He didn't call someone. He turned it inward. And then, he unleashed it outward. What happened next shocked everyone who knew him. In a single night, one single night, Shamar Elkins moved through the lives of his family like a storm that had finally stopped holding itself back. His wife, his ex-wife, and 8 children. 8. The youngest among them likely had no idea what was happening. The oldest may have understood, in those final moments, that something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. Let that land. 8 children. The investigation that followed would take officers, detectives, and prosecutors into a darkness that many of them said they had never encountered before, even after years on the job. Not because of what happened, but because of who it happened to, and because of the cold, calculated nature of how it unfolded. The question nobody wanted to ask. When a man kills a woman who wronged him, as twisted and horrific as that is, investigators have seen it. When a man kills his spouse in a moment of rage, devastating, but sadly, familiar. But when a man kills his children, that is a different category of evil. And the question every detective, every journalist, every person who heard this story eventually asked was the same. Why didn't he just leave? If the relationships were broken, walk away. If the co-parenting was unbearable, get a lawyer. If the pressure felt impossible to carry, tell someone. But Shamar Elkins didn't leave. And here's the chilling part. The psychological profile that emerged in the aftermath of that night painted a portrait of a man who didn't see leaving as an option. Not because he couldn't, but because, in his mind, he owned those relationships. He owned those children. And if he couldn't have them the way he wanted to, then no one could. Psychologists have a name for this kind of thinking. It's called possessive annihilation. The warped, horrifying belief that destroying the people you claim to love is somehow better than losing them. It is a logic that makes no sense to a healthy mind. But inside the fractured, deteriorating psychology of Shamar Elkins, it made perfect sense. And that is the most disturbing thing about this entire story. The motive revealed. This is the part investigators pieced together over weeks of interviews, phone records, and digital forensics. And when it all came together, when the full picture emerged, it didn't look like a sudden explosion. It looked like a plan. Or at least the result of a mind that had been rehearsing this moment without fully realizing it. In the time leading up to that night, Shamar Elkins had reportedly been dealing with a convergence of pressures. Custody disputes. Financial stress. A fractured sense of identity. For a man who built his whole sense of self around control, around being the center of his family's world, those pressures weren't just stressful. They were existential. They threatened who he was. And when men like Shamar Elkins feel that kind of threat, they don't fight it. They don't adapt. They eliminate it. Investigators believe the trigger, the final catalyst, may have been a conversation or a decision made by one of the women in his life that represented the ultimate loss of control. Perhaps a custody decision that didn't go his way. Perhaps an ultimatum. Perhaps simply the feeling that he was being erased from the picture he had built for himself. Whatever it was, it broke the last thin barrier between his darkest impulses and the world around him. And 8 children, 8 innocent children, paid the price for it. The wives were also victims of a man who had decided, in his most deluded and dangerous moment, that if he couldn't control the story, he would end it. The aftermath, a community shattered. In the days after, there was a silence that people described differently. Some called it disbelief. Some called it grief. Some just said the air felt different. Because when something like this happens, it doesn't just end with the crime scene tape. It ripples through the neighborhood where those children played, through the schools where their empty chairs suddenly meant something terrible, through the extended family members who had to figure out how to carry a loss this massive, through every parent in that community who looked at their own children and couldn't find words, and to the first responders, the officers, the paramedics, who arrived at the scene that night and saw things they would carry with them for the rest of their careers. Because what they walked into was not a crime scene. It was a graveyard built inside a home that was supposed to be safe. And that image, that reality, doesn't wash off. Not then. Not now. The legal reckoning. Shamar Elkins survived that night. And that meant he had to face something far slower and more deliberate than what he had inflicted on his family. He had to face a courtroom. He had to sit there while the full scope of what he had done was laid out, methodically, painfully, in front of a judge, a jury, and a public that could barely look at him. Prosecutors built a case that went far beyond the physical acts committed that night. They built a psychological portrait. They showed who Shamar Elkins was behind the quiet exterior. They showed the pattern of control, the escalating tensions, the documented disputes. And they argued, successfully, that this was not a moment of madness. This was not an uncontrollable break with reality. This was a man who made choices. Terrible, irreversible, monstrous choices. And for those choices, he faced the full weight of the law. The sentencing phase of cases like this becomes something strange. Because no sentence can account for 8 children. No number of years, no legal language, no verdict can fill the space those 8 lives occupied. All the law can do is make certain that the person responsible never gets the chance to make that choice again. And in this case, the law did exactly that. The question that remains. I want to sit here for a second. Because we've talked about what happened. We've talked about why. But there's a question I keep coming back to. And it's not about Shamar Elkins. It's about the people around him. What do we do with the warning signs we see in the people around us? Because Shamar Elkins wasn't born that night. He was shaped. Slowly. By psychology, by circumstance, by a sense of entitlement over other people's lives that nobody ever challenged hard enough. Every story like this one has a version of the same haunting detail buried inside it. Someone saw something. Someone felt something was off. Someone had a moment where they almost said something, and didn't. And I'm not saying that to assign blame. I'm saying it because in the stories that don't end this way, the ones where someone steps back from the edge, it's almost always because someone reached out before it was too late. The next Shamar Elkins is out there right now. He looks normal. He looks like a neighbor. He looks like someone you know. And the only thing that might stop him is someone paying attention. The moment that defines the case. Let me bring you back to the very beginning for a moment. 8 children. The youngest just old enough to trust. The oldest just young enough to still believe the world was safe. All of them gone. Not because of an accident. Not because of a disease or a disaster or an act of God. Because of one man. One decision. One night. And when investigators stood in the aftermath of what Shamar Elkins had done, one of them reportedly said something quietly, almost to himself. He said, "He killed the only people who ever really loved him." And that line has stayed with everyone who heard it. Because it's true. Those children didn't love him conditionally. They didn't love him with the weight of adult grievances. They loved him the way children love, completely. Simply. Without reservation. And he destroyed it. All of it. Because he couldn't bear the thought of someone else having what he believed was his. The haunting. There are no words that close a story like this cleanly. There's no tidy ending. No redemption arc. No silver lining. There are just 8 names. 8 names that should have grown into adults with stories of their own. 8 names that should have had futures. Messy, complicated, beautiful human futures. And instead, they are 8 names on 8 graves. Because one man decided his pain was the most important thing in any room. If you're watching this, you knew going in that it wouldn't be a comfortable story. And you were right. Some stories aren't supposed to be comfortable. Some stories are supposed to stay with you. This is one of them. Remember those 8 names. And hold your people a little closer tonight. Closing, the word that remains. Before I let you go, I want to leave you with something. Because in a story this dark, in a tragedy this heavy, there has to be something that holds. Something that doesn't bend. Something that speaks directly to what was done to those 8 children. I found it in the words of Jesus himself. Matthew chapter 18, verse 6. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck, and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. 2,000 years ago, those words were spoken. And they have never been more fitting than they are right now. God himself said it. That there is no punishment on earth severe enough for the person who harms a little one. Not the millstone. Not the depth of the sea. Nothing this world can devise comes close to what justice truly demands for what was done to Jayla, Shayla, Braylon, Kayla, Khedarrion, Layla, Markaydon, and Sariahh. But here is what I hold on to. What human courts could only begin to address. A higher court will finish. Those 8 children are not forgotten. Not by the people who loved them. Not by everyone watching this. And not by God. And Shamar Elkins, whatever earthly sentence he serves, has an appointment that no lawyer can delay, no courtroom can negotiate, and no prison wall can shield him from. The word says, "It is mine to avenge." And I believe that. If this story moved you, if those names stayed with you, I want to ask you to do something before you scroll away. Not just hit the like button. Not just subscribe, though yes, please do both. I want you to share this video. Because one of the most heartbreaking parts of this story is that the warning signs were there. The threats. The history. The phone calls. The cry for help. And too many people either didn't know what to do, or didn't feel like it was their place to act. Maybe someone watching this video right now is in a situation where they know something. Maybe someone close to them has said things that scared them. Maybe they'd been telling themselves it's not serious enough to report. This story is proof of what happens when we wait. So share this. Because the next video with a story like this one is already being written somewhere. And the only thing that might stop it is someone who saw this, felt something, and acted. If you're new here, subscribe. We cover the stories that don't let you look away. The ones that matter. The ones that ask hard questions. Turn on your notifications. Because these cases deserve your attention, not your algorithm. And drop a comment below. Tell me what part of this story hit you the hardest. Tell me what you think justice looks like for 8 children. Tell me their names. Say their names. Jayla, Shayla, Braylon, Kayla, Khedarrion, Layla, Markaydon, Sariahh. Rest in power, babies. You deserve so much better.